Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels.
Hello everyone, my name is Joris Peels, and this is the Prosthetics and Orthotics Podcast with Brent Wright. Hi Brent, how you doing?
Hey, Joris. Yeah, man. Merry Christmas to you. Just a couple days late, right? I did text you and all that stuff, but it was good. It was cold
Yeah.
here in North Carolina, and I know in other parts. So hope everybody's staying warm as well.
Yeah, definitely. I hear we were a lot less cold here. We had some good times with family and stuff, so it was a wonderful time. Wonderful time. I hope you managed to have a good time with your family and friends and stuff as well.
Yeah, no, this is great, and I'm super excited about this podcast as far as just kind of a year in review of some
Mm-hmm.
takeaways, some things that we want to do
Mm-hmm.
better for next year, some takeaways that we had from really all our awesome guests this past year. So I'm excited to dive into some of that.
Definitely, dude. I mean, first off, on the general, I'm more than pleased about this. Actually, I think I know that we're not supposed to say that, right?
We may be a little biased, but I think it's gone well.
No. But I mean, look, we had a goal initially. It was just for us, right? We were just trying to explore the digitization thing. What is digitization? 3D scanning, CAD, and 3D printing. What does that mean for aesthetics and prosthetics? I knew nothing, right, about this whole OMP thing. And we were just curious. And we wondered if we'd get guests, and we wondered if it would be useful or fun. And I think yes, it's fun for us. It's been fun for the guests, and I've learned a lot. And I hope you've learned stuff as well. So I'm very, very pleased with this effort so far.
Yeah, I mean, and how cool is it that like people are now reaching out and saying, "Hey, can I come on the podcast?"
Yeah.
I mean, that's who would have thunk it?
No, exactly. No, I really like that. I really like the people also giving suggestions of of content that we should include, things we should be talking about. So there's real engagement there. So I think that's really positive, and we've got lots of listeners. So I think on the whole, I'm actually really, really happy about this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, for you, really, I mean, you've been involved in some of the stuff just through your consulting, but like, what would you say is maybe your top one or two things that you really took away from this year?
Well, from the podcast specifically, I
Yeah,
mean, I think this is going to be really weird, and it's going to be super obvious for you guys, but for somebody coming out of this industry, it's the one thing that keeps coming up, and everyone is this whole insurance reimbursement thing. So that is something that I know it wasn't something it was in scope, if you will, for us who wanted to talk about it, but it just always came up from the first episodes when we were talking about like how does an orthotist prosthetist work to when we talk about people about software, designing new devices, growing their businesses, running just an OMP like a small shop or running a chain. It always comes back to that insurance element, and maybe it's obvious. Of course, it's obvious that insurance is a big part of today's health system, but just that kind of that thing that was I didn't know it was that such a huge component, and that there was a lot of like that there was like issues with that that was such a big part of your average person's business. I just had no idea.
yeah. Well, and I think that's interesting, and I think the stuff that interests me, kind of along the other side, is where you have this either government or socialized medicine, and how that ties into prosthetic and orthotic care. I don't, and that might be a good thing for next year. I don't think
I
we
would
really
like
have
that, dude. Yeah, let's talk to somebody
anybody,
from
from
yeah.
somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk to someone from like Sweden or the Netherlands or Belgium or something to see if it's really, really very different.
Yeah, yeah. You got my wheels spinning here on
Yeah.
who we can get on.
No, yeah, I'll go see if I can find someone because I think that would be interesting to see if that really how the insurance not only if like a socialized medicine system would work differently, but also how there's different regulatory systems would. I know, for example, in Holland for orthotics, you can get one every 2 years, and it's maxed out to 2,000 euros per like device. So all these shoes are actually ridiculously expensive, right? But there's one per 2 years, so you couldn't get like a cheaper one to go running on or something like that. Most people are just limited to one, so that really influences the design here in the Netherlands. So I think that kind of stuff would be really interesting to see how that regulatory stuff, how that shapes your devices and your patient care.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing is I don't want to say it's direct to consumer here in the
Uh,
US, but patients have a choice in the care that they receive. So some patients may stay local, they may go somewhere else.
yeah.
But in like I know in the UK and you may not have that choice unless you choose to self pay. And
Mhm,
so one of the things that I find interesting, in places other than the US, the consumer really isn't uh, the end goal for a company. Like
mhm,
technically, the consumer is the government, right? So it's
mhm,
like um, you want to provide good service, and I would venture to say that most people want to provide good service, but
mhm,
that isn't the end all be all to getting paid for a product in
mhm,
the in a socialized medicine environment. And
mhm,
so I'm kind of curious on like how that plays together because
mhm,
when you look at social media for some of these companies, they don't really it's either non-existent or they don't really even showcase what they've done for their patients because it doesn't technically matter because the government is going to allow them to see this particular subset of patients regardless of results.
mhm. It'll be really interesting to find out. I agree. I agree. Another thing, by the way, that was my big takeaway for me personally, and this is going to show my complete nincompoopedness initially on the subject, is I literally thought you just went to some person and Sally would make you this device and that's it. You know, you just walk out the door like you bought a belt or something or shoes or whatever. You know, I did not know that there was like this kind of ongoing dialogue, kind of to fit it, and also later on to fit more devices and kind of like work with the patient over many years, perhaps. And that's something we've been able to tell a couple of your patients' stories, stuff, but also other people that it's much more a symbiotic kind of relationship and a long term relationship, as you might have like with your tailor, or some people might have with their GP or their family doctor. You know, it's much more kind of an ongoing relationship with the patient. I really, really didn't know that before we're starting the show.
Yeah, and I think for like the US side of things, that's the hard part, right? Is
Hmm.
because we don't get paid for those extra visits over the course of the life of a prosthesis.
Hmm.
And we get kind of paid as a one lump thing. And so that's an interesting takeaway. I like that, yours.
Hmm.
Very nice.
Okay, and then the other thing is like just like I think I don't remember which podcast it was in actually, but we kind of came, or I came to the conclusion. You guys probably already knew it during that one podcast that actually you're, as an individual orthotist prosthetist, you're a very small, you're one person or a mom and pop shop, or maybe you're three or four shops in Ohio or something, but you're like smallest player in this game. You know, you've got these hospital systems that are bigger than you, and they kind of own the customer, if you will, right? You've got the doctors that refer the customers to you, often case. Then you've got these insurers, and then you've got the companies making, let's say, the components, and the companies making the software, and you're kind of the smallest player in that whole landscape, you know. So the caregiver kind of you know, is the smallest player, and that to me, there's a huge imbalance. And I keep thinking this is really kind of really absurd. But a friend of mine imported coffee at one point, and he was working with these individual coffee farmers, and you would see like the coffee farmer in the poor country, and we've mentioned this before as well. The coffee farmer in the poor country was the one making the investment in the land, doing his work and all this, taking all the risk, and taking on the risk of bringing this coffee to market at 12 months or more, you know. Whereas the giant coffee companies that we all know and we all do business with, they just buy the product, you know. So they're actually not doing the capital intensive, the risk part of this. And I saw exactly the same kind of parallel in this OMP market where the little guy is doing not only all the physical work, but also taking the risk. And everyone else in the market's bigger, you know?
Oh, and that's man, such a good point. And because so many times, like we just had a situation at our office where 2 years ago we delivered a device, and there's some audit that happened, and now they're asking for extra documentation, and they're going to go ahead and take their money back until we can prove that we actually did what we say we did.
Oh, wow.
So how crazy is that? I mean,
Yeah.
like, we not only have the time outlay, the capital expenditure outlay of cash to provide the device. The patient's been in the device for 2+ years, and now they're taking their money back because, or they're going to be waiting for some paperwork, and then they'll take their money back if they feel like our paperwork doesn't meet their expectations.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's crazy. That's
It's
crazy.
crazy.
That doesn't happen a lot of things. And okay, the other thing is that I took away really is this is a people business, right? And it's a personality business. We found some really interesting personalities on the patient side and also on the practitioner side, I think. Much more so than we expected if we were doing this on software or whatever, or some other thing. And I also think what I really learned is that there's no typical O&P person, right? Or like, okay, we can say there's certain typical elements we can discover of these people, but they come from all walks of life, all types of backgrounds, all different types of degrees. They have all different types of things that interest them in the people. Generally, we could say the commonalities are they like working with people and they like kind of working with their hands, inventing stuff, And they typically like to help as well. But that's also kind of like the biggest buckets I think we can put this in. So you're finding like you have a real diversity of thought and opinion and in these practitioners. There's a really, really different group. And then all of a sudden they're all very kinesthetic, if you will. They're all very much hands-on inventory type people. But at the same time, they're super different, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think like one of my biggest takeaways was when we talked a little bit about investment with multiple people, and I love some of your takes around investment because that's kind of what you do is you go out and see these companies, and I love kind of seeing you scratch your head a little bit like, okay, this is a neat like niche, but how do you inject a capital or create a business around what we do? It's not as cut and dry as some other things you may invest in.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing. If we did have a couple times when we were brainstorming about the hangar thing, where we brainstormed really about the market, we really took a kind of more clinical not, but kind of like more detached view, a helicopter view. Then the ruthless part of me comes out, right? This is like this is the thing that people hire me usually because I'm ruthless, not because I'm like some cuddle bear kind of thing, and it's like they hire me because I'm, I see things that other people don't, and and usually it's in being very, very aggressive, right? Because I don't believe in being second and things necessarily. But if we look at these kind of things, I mean, the short answer would be that orthotics doesn't scale, or the other short answer is that there are so many inefficiencies in this market, and it's so ripe for disruption. And I think we can include this. And I think the one thing we came upon time and time again is that we think that the market's ripe for disruption, but also there are all these players that can disrupt this market that really could cause chaos for the individual O&P practitioner. I think not only did we think of this, like a ton of our guests out in and of themselves kind of like, kind of pointed out individual examples of them, of this business getting disrupted. And I think time and time again, you can really see that the individual practitioner, the person who makes their own devices and wants to have that patient contact, they're going to be kind of under siege. I think that's another thing. I would love to have a nicer, more positive kind of conclusion, but it does seem like it's going to get a lot tougher before it gets easier. I think for this market, for the practitioners in it.
Well, I loved kind of your insight into, especially with the Hanger acquisition of Transcend and the SureStep, is like they are truly going after controlling a vertical. So what does that mean for the small guys, right, or the regional players? It's how can they also buy from themselves, and one of the best ways to buy from themselves and control costs and such is really taking a deep dive or a deep look into how additive manufacturing can change that for them. And so I thought that was really good insight from you as far as, hey, additive manufacturing can do this, this, and this, and this, and then all of a sudden you're buying from yourself or you're controlling your expenditures based on what you design internally, and I love that. And I think it's a superpower for some of these small mom and pops or even regional players to really compete against some of the bigger players like Hanger, Autobach, and Oser.
Yeah, but also like to leverage them. I think you made the point a couple of times in the podcast. I think where you're saying now is digital. Now is the age of digital because digital can ensure yourself. Digital can enable your survival and can really allow you to become more efficient. And it's not necessarily a choice. It's not a nice to have. It's just much more. So I think we saw your passion a couple of times, or more than a couple of times in this podcast, where you're really saying, look, the time to adopt all this digital stuff is now.
Yeah. Well, and I think, tying that in, it was so awesome to have some of the patients that have been on the receiving side of these devices, of the orthotics and prosthetic devices, saying this is the best. It's been life-changing for me, to them. And I've had multiple clinicians say, it was when I listened to that podcast and the patient is saying that this device has been doing better than my traditionally fabricated device. And I'm like, hold on a second, maybe I should look into 3D printing. So I think that's been a powerful part as I look back at this past year, and we need to continue to do more of, is getting the end users and the patients
totally.
feedback on these sort of devices.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that was also some of the most powerful stuff we did this year. Like we have like 38 episodes or something like that, or something like this in total. Like that some of the most powerful stuff is the actual patient talking about the impact of their life or their kid's life, or and how it just changed. And that's another like two different learnings from those same patient experience. One is how the individual, well, three learnings actually. One is how much you mentioned already, how much the individual device can impact someone's life. Like standing still or not stopping for people while you cross a hotel lobby or something like that. That's a huge impact, and I don't think of that. I don't understand that, That's the one thing I thought was like a huge thing that I didn't realize. The second thing is, and just how much you have to work with the patient to really get a device, and how much the patient can input on this process. Again, like beginning this, like what I said earlier, like I had no idea there was an ongoing relationship, right?
Right.
And also, I had no idea that it was. I just thought it was like kind of your doctor. If I'm used to going to a doctor, and doctor's like, you need to do this, kind of, they're kind of nowadays they're supposed to be different, but frankly, I'm like going to somebody who spent 10, 12 years studying this. I'm going to be like, hey, what do I need to do? And I don't really give myself much choices, but I do think that in this process there are a lot of choices, and there is a lot of like input from the patient. And then the third thing is kind of really linked to that, and that I really noticed a couple of times, is just how vocal you can be as a patient in this area, and how much that changes your outcome, right? I mean, I had people saying like, hey, you need to, for example, proactively find an orthotist process for you, or you need to be able to communicate with that person, or you need to have a good dialogue with that person. You need to have a good open dialogue. And that to me, I had not considered that at all. I literally thought it was like, I don't know, like a kind of, you walked in and somebody fits you with it and boom, you walk out. You know what I mean? I never know that my opinion mattered,
Right.
And I think that a lot of people like who are new to this, who would just get in an accident and need something like that, I don't think they'll know that either. I think that to me is a really surprising thing that I learned, where I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you really have to kind of ask for stuff, and you have to be critical. You can't just like go with the first person you find and be like, okay, I guess he'll be my orthotist or something. You have to find someone that works for you. And that to me is also, I think, a big learning.
Right. Well, and I think some of that is like the power, especially in the US, the power of social media and forums. I can't tell you how many times, especially for like East Point and even, some of our clinicians that are specialized in specific parts of providing an orthosis or prosthesis, is their name will show up on forums where other patients are like, hey, you really need to go see like Jackie Bailey. We had her on. You really need to go see Jackie. She's amazing when she's doing, transfemoral prostheses. And these patients, they talk to each other. And I think that's great and super empowering for them. But in the same way, it should cause clinicians and companies to kind of just step back and say, we also need to provide excellent care and empathetic care and all this, because people do talk, and regardless, you should provide excellent care. But on top of that, on a selfish side of things, it's super good for business too. And I think that's really neat, especially as these patients are talking to each other.
Yeah, totally, totally. I think vis-a-vis the digitization thing, I'm I was really surprised that not more people complained about 3D scanning, right? And so the two things about that. One is that there's more solved things with 3D scanning, that people have figured out their own 3D scanning workflows, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's products out there that work for these people that people have found. So that was a positive thing. And also, I think a lot of people just have onboarded the cost of 3D scanning. It's just like, now accept this, you know? And I was actually quite surprised. I expected more people to complain about 3D scanning and tell me it was horrible. And yeah, you guys are mostly like, yeah, it's something I do, and then, or I prefer cast, or I prefer to scan the cast. It was something that's kind of much more baked in, I think, for a lot of people than I thought it would be.
Yeah, and I I would agree with you on that, and I don't know why that was, but it does seem like people kind of figured out their path, and now with, like Einstar, or the Shining 3D releasing that Einstar scanner that's a sub 1000. You've got Comb Scan with their the iPhone technology stuff, and then even some free options there as well, along with the occipital stuff. So you've got these, it's started to become a pretty crowded market in the sub $1,000 range, whereas previously it was $50,000 for a scanner. I don't know if you remember the Polhemus scanners,
Yeah,
Scorpion and
yeah.
such, but I mean that's how much that stuff ran back
Mhm.
in the early 2000s and such.
Yeah, but also, like, I don't know if you remember, all, like, I do these, like, market reports and stuff for 3D printers and 3D scanners and stuff. Usually, for the 3D printer, you just update it, you know? And for the scanner, if you do a market report on 3D scanning, it's like, this one's bankrupt, this one didn't work anymore, this guy's left the market, this app didn't work, or, you know? So it's a slaughter out there. So I'd be really interested in seeing what happens with that market, and see if it really. Everybody always sees this as a foregone conclusion, but it's like, you know, it always kind of takes longer. It's more difficult than you think, you know.
Right, right.
Or it has been so far. It would be nice if it would just work. If some magical AI thing would make scanning work all the time, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, I think the other interesting thing, as I'm thinking back to when we had John Naft on with the Comb Scan, and it was, if for him it was just at a necessity. They wanted, you know, they wanted to put a scanner in everybody's hand,
yeah,
and I thought, well, that's pretty cool. But I really thought that his takeaway from that and what he does for the overall field,
yeah,
is, okay, I have this app, right, that
yeah,
can get the foundational scan, but that scan is really worthless unless you put it into the workflow of something else. And so what I think has been neat is just the way that he has encouraged companies to collaborate. So you've got like the Mercurus and the Spenties all have kind of APIs into them, and then other softwares are using like the Comb as this, it's a scan acquisition because they've got that part covered, but they have the great software side of things. So this idea of collaboration, so everybody can make it, is something that I love, specifically in the kind of the small business segment.
yeah. Totally, totally, totally. On the 3D printing thing, one thing that I thought was, like, really exciting, like, or what I would have assumed initially that you guys use, but you don't. It doesn't come up as much. Is to use the 3D printer for prototyping, and use it for prototyping new designs and new things, and that, I thought, just given the fact that there's so much custom work going on, I would have thought that was much more widespread and more utilized than it actually was.
Huh? It's an interesting point, and I would say in the upper extremity realm, it is used.
Mhm.
But this idea of creating prototypes, where technically every single one of these devices are prototypes,
Yeah.
um, is interesting. But the ability to iterate
Mhm.
has been, has come up quite a bit. Of, hey, the socket's a little bit big, or this patient has shrunk, or whatever it has been, you're able to go back to that digital model and then make an adjustment and then make another one. So that's been
but
neat.
what is interesting to me is that apparently every single new case is new and completely new, and everybody's a snowflake, all that stuff. Okay, I understand.
Right.
But and then you iterate on the path of doing this one unique design, right? Okay, cool. But what I'm not seeing is like the individual practitioner saying, okay, I'm going to 3D print like 10 of these little struts to see which strut or which claw or which thing, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's really strange to me if we're looking at like how we normally would develop things.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it seems like it's completely divorced. Like every single time we'll start for the the next person, it's like a goldfish thing. You know, it's like the next person that walks in the door, I'm going to make the best prosthesis for her. Perfect, wonderful sentiment. You know, but hey, how about if we have problems with a certain element or component? Why don't we iterate the hell out of that component to see if it's better? You know what I mean?
Right. Right. No, I definitely see that, and I like that. I would say that along those lines, though, is there?
Mm-hmm.
I think where some of the iteration needs to happen is, hey, we're going to start 3D printing some of the component, like the actual components. Most of those you can buy out of a catalog, and you kind of tinker toy it together. And you put multiple pieces together. But with the advent of a lot of the printing technologies now, is you can make your own components if you really wanted to, and streamline some of that process. And I think that's a really good point as far as how do we iterate and how do we make those components better each time, instead of buying them, out of the box or off the shelf.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the other thing that really struck me, or no, I'm really enthusiastic about this. It was about, I know dice design. I love dice design. I know I've done filament innovations for a while as well, and I know about spiralize, right? Because it's the way you make a vase, right?
Right.
But the idea, the combination of that in the this high flow methodology for the spare sockets and maybe more, was a huge thing for me. And it really, really opened my high flow for me was a curiosity, and I think high flow for OMP for these test sockets is to me a huge application that could point to many more. Using, like, for example, filament innovation printers, the high flow nozzles from Dice Design and others, using special materials and stuff, we could really make something in a completely new way. And that's, to me, like, that was good to know about OMP, but also to me, to be using that kind of a format thing and printing it in 2 hours, this test socket, a check socket, and having that as a kind of finished intermediate product, that to me was a kind of like, it opened my eyes to there being many more of these products out there in other realms.
Yeah. Well, and I still think your reaction was the best when somebody said, yeah, I don't use vase mode, and I think you're still picking your jaw off the floor, just trying to figure that out. But that was funny, and we ran across that multiple times with different clinicians, and
oh wow,
that was the best.
Oh my god, I'm still a bit traumatized by that, actually, to be honest. But that to me really kind of showed that, okay, wait a minute, we're not doing that in other areas. We don't make parts like that in engineering and automotive, and we don't assume that we can make a thing that's that large in 2 hours,
Right.
And then the ideal combination of, hey, it doesn't have to be that pretty. Well, there's a lot of B-side components in automobiles or other things that don't need to be pretty, but they need to be quite strong. So I think that really inspired me much outside of this area as well. And I think also on the software front, I think the key learning is, of course, that Mesh Mixer is amazing, and the whole industry would stop without Mesh Mixer.
That's right.
Oh my god, it's amazing. Like, Mesh Mixer to me is like the linchpin of this whole 3D printing thing. That's one thing, and I think, but also another thing we noticed is that everyone has a completely different workflow. Right, everyone we asked, there was very little commonality apart from Mesh Mixer then in the types of tools they use. There's people with Spentis, there's people with Fusion, there was people with Geomagic, and there's all sorts of different ways of going from using the file portion of the tool chain. So I was just quite surprised how fragmented that was.
Do you? I mean, that's a really good point, and I always wonder, like, typically people will say, "Well, there's enough space in the sandbox for all of them," but
Uh-huh.
we're a super small field, and there's a lot of
No,
people trying to create this niche software for us. I mean, do you think that's actually true?
it depends. I mean, I think it depends if they want to just like stay OMP specific, or they were coming up with some kind of file to device workflow that they want to do in, for hospital 3D print labs, for braces and other models. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think definitely to me the OMP market is big enough to sustain one or two players that are very good at managing this whole workflow for a paid kind of portion, and there's also room for like one or two players like kind of in a free kind of way. And there's also room for like a player like Fusion or something like that, doing it as an add-on to their CAD kind of thing. Are these people going to be making a ton of money in that workflow? I don't think so. But I think there's a lot of if we're looking at how much the individual practitioner is spending on these files, something like we're depending on what we were seeing, we saw people talking about half an hour or several hour kind of just work in files, and so there's a lot of time to be done here. So if you look at the overall value, we're saying that per device, every practitioner is going to spend an hour just mopping up files. Well, that's a dollar amount. How much is the practitioner worth per hour, and how many hours does he or she spend on this device? Yeah, there's a dollar amount, and that's going to like delineate our market. Now, we have exactly the same kind of challenges in braces, right? There's casting companies that are doing casts. There's post-operative casts. There's all sorts of fixation devices generally, and there's in-hospital printing. So the market itself is bigger, but the big prize to me is just like all your workflow belong to us kind of stuff, like what Octon kind of semi-promised, and what a lot of other people have been wanting to do is just like for everyone automate their workflows. And that to me is that's a quite sizable opportunity. But I think I'm very skeptical about no, this market is not big enough for everyone. You need actual revenue, and you're going to have to deliver on actual performance in order to get that actual revenue. People aren't just going to like willy nilly. People don't want to spend 10 different packages first off, and people aren't going to willy nilly spend $50 or $1,000 a month on all sorts of things. That's not the business. Like there are other niches where people do spend several $1,000s per seat per month on all sorts of crazy software. Now, OMP just isn't wealthy enough for that to happen. So the prices have to be much more reasonable as well.
Well, I think that was, what's been interesting to me is it appears that some of these software companies are really trying to capture this idea of like the token market, right? So you can use my software for free, get it to where you want it, and then we'll just charge you per STL getting it out. And that's super cost effective way to do it from the clinical side of things. But long term, I don't know. Man, that's a tough road
Yeah.
to go on the side of things. Any thoughts along that?
No, definitely. I think it's just going to be really difficult for their valuation as well, right? If they say they have so many paying customers, you can put a valuation on them. They could have a market share, or they could show growth. Of all the OMP practitioners in America, 10% use us or something like this.
Right.
Now, this kind of like pay-as-you-go thing, I think it's an attractive model, but it's a very dangerous model to use if we're just looking at it from the software kind of company's point of view. Because how do you even tell your investors or the people inquiring you how big you are in this market, compared to other people, and how is an investor or a company going to believe in you if people could just like walk away with the next tool? There's no lock-in. So from a business model, from these guys trying to raise money and propel this company into owning this space, right? And we are talking about a space that's, we're not big enough for Siemens or or Autodesk to put a ton of money in here, right? So there is room to operate for these guys, but if they can't sell it to investors, how are they going to do this? So I think from their business model point of view, this is really problematic. For the
Yeah.
individual practitioner point of view, I would love to be able to test out 6 different things, right? And maybe do, just divide all my workflow into 6 different ones for a couple of months and figure out which one's better or not. And that to me is something that you can really do if they go to this kind of approach. So I think for the practitioner, it's wonderful to be able to really kind of test out the full functionality. This is the actual software, not the hope of it. This is the actual thing that I'm going to get. But I just don't think, like, as a business, if I would be advised by the software company would hire me, I'd tell them never to do this. To me, it doesn't work.
So what you're saying though is
Yeah.
to try to create some loyalty around this idea of locking somebody in to a
Yeah.
product, that they are willingly wanting to do, right? But then you create some loyalty, and that becomes their tool or their workhorse. So is that what
Yeah,
I'm
then
hearing?
you have cash flow. So if you have loyalty, you have cash flow, right?
Yep.
You've got customers. You can tell people, hey, we're growing by X amount of customers.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell people this is what these customers are paying. So they'll be like, oh my God, they're paying $500 a month. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you have people that are paying you $500 a month. So there's going to be a guy who's going to scream at you over the phone and saying, hey, this thing doesn't work. And if you're in an approach where it's kind of free or near free, like, a lot of people don't really give you good feedback. If you're spending $500 a month or something like that, and it's a key component of your workflow, and the new software update doesn't work, or it's the server is down for a minute, you bet you're getting kind of an angry person on the phone.
Yeah.
And if it's just some kind of like thing you use every once in a while, then you're not going to give your feedback. You're not going to call these people. You're not going to be annoying. So it's also going to inhibit you from getting better. But this
Right.
is much more from like the point of view of the software company. Like, it could be a really interesting kind of way to do it if everyone changed. But I just think from a software company, I think you'll be better faster, and you'll get more money faster if you do it the old way.
I think I've never thought about it that way, as far as like, y- when you do have that update and something doesn't goes sideways, um, your users are going to let you know because they're invested into the tools. Whereas
Yeah, exactly.
they if you're paying per token or whatever, they're like, it's not working. Let me go use this
Yeah, use
other,
something else.
free software. So that is crazy. I never had thought about that.
Yeah, there's no wrong with that. But it's also interesting. I think we were talking about where does the value accrue, and you made a big point of this, and I was shocked by this. I didn't think of this. You were talking about all these AI kind of like the automated tools, like that, push button tools.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of people that really were fairly opinionated about this, and they're saying, "No," and up until this point, I had assumed that all these push button tools, everybody would love this. I press a button, and my magical 3D scan becomes a device. Ta-da! You know. And you were the opinion, a couple other people as well, were like, wait a minute, but then the value is accruing to whoever's making those tools, and the design sensibility and the intelligence is being kind of sucked up from me, is put in their tool. And then at one point, I'm never going to be able to do this by myself.
Right.
And that to me was a huge point. That really, really made me think a lot.
I think that's an interesting point on, being able to do it for yourself. And I think it was
There's a bunch of people, man, three or
Derek
four
and
people. Yeah,
Arthur. I mean, they really
yeah,
said,
exactly.
you may go for the push button tool, but it's super
Mhm.
important for you to go ahead and learn how to make
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I thought the other interesting point along all those was, if you start using these tools and giving feedback to the software companies, they really love that and appreciate it because they're getting better and better. But you're also becoming their asset,
yeah.
as far as the production of this software. And for me, that's kind of a hard part to be in, because I do take so much pride in some of the stuff that we're able to do with the software packages that we use, and we can literally create anything those push button softwares do. But there does come a time where your time is much more valuable than spending a few minutes in front of a screen. That's something that this other software can do, and do better, more consistently. And so then you're really going to be at the crossroads of like, am I going to give up this perceived control to this software, or will I keep on doing it the ways that I always have? And that's not always the answer, is keeping on doing the way that you always have, for sure.
Oh, totally. Oh, another thing, by the way, before I forget it, the one thing that really super surprised me is just how terribly HP minded you guys are. It's like there's so many people that brought up MGF, and so many people that were like HP this, HP that, and that for us and that really was surprising to me, just how much you guys use HP as technology and ONP.
Right. Well, so I think that's a couple reasons. This was, SLS has been around forever. Multi-jet fusion, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of our prosthetic devices, you do have to look for something that's watertight, airtight. And SLS doesn't get that to you in its raw form. However, now with the advent of, Dimension and AMT and some other post-processing solutions, even some coatings and that sort of thing, SLS is back definitely in play for the O&P market. It's just they had shifted, but I can't tell you how many calls I've taken and messages I've gotten of different companies wanting to really move into this powder-based fusion SLS side of for O&P, and there's a lot of benefits to that now that we have the post-processing.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it could be interesting. It's very difficult to do this with a one-person shop. Though the economics of this, we should maybe talk a little bit more about that, because the economics of having this as a service and deploying this, it's actually, it doesn't really make sense in my opinion until you really do a lot of devices and a lot of production. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it doesn't all of a sudden become a worthwhile technology, not only for check stuff, but also for final stuff that could be very advantageous, I think.
Yeah, well, and the other cool thing is that the SLS, especially with some of the bigger machines and such that are offered through EOS and 3D systems that are bigger than the multi-jet fusion machine, it also allows for more work into like the spinal side of things, and even so just some of the larger devices that we would normally end up having to split in the multi-jet fusion machine just because we don't have the space. So, and I think SLS is pretty cost effective.
MGF is usually cheaper.
Is it?
Yeah, well, it depends on a lot of stuff actually, but generally it tends to be cheaper.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. It just depends on utilization. We should maybe go a little bit deeper into that. I think a lot of people would be interested in that as well. Just a little bit about
utilization. Yeah.
You kind of seriously want come on, just be honest. It's just the two of us here. You want like a room full of machines, right at one point. And I'm always like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, well, and I think some of that just stems from we had done a lot of contract manufacturing, and it just matters so much with the not only orientation but refresh rate and packing density and all that, and a lot of times contract manufacturers, they want to take some of that into consideration, but because most contract manufacturers, it's a race to the bottom of how much can you just shove in and print, and hopefully that a lot of your parts come out the way that you want them to. And with orthotics and prosthetics, it just can't be that way. You can't compromise on any of that, or you risk a failure. And so
a lot of guys don't know what they're doing. This is also really
well. That is true. Well, and that's where potentially partnering or creating some strategic partnerships with companies that want to do prosthetics and orthotics and have a ton of machines, that may be the future. But then at that point, it's like it almost comes down to like the software side of things. Here we are giving our hard-earned knowledge essentially away to a company that has multiple machines and giving them a massive strategic advantage. Whereas if you were to keep it internally and provide a good product, that's very attractive as well. So it goes both ways, I would say.
Okay. I'm seeing some stuff crystallize. Like I'm seeing more patients. We love hearing from patients, right?
Right.
more about the software, because we're like really interested in the software and what's going to happen. So like, we'd love to talk about more software. I think we'd like to talk a little bit more about the economics of the sintering side of stuff and all this, and maybe even also on the FDM side, maybe also. We haven't talked a lot about on VAT polymerization because it doesn't really apply, but hey, it could to certain stuff. We haven't talked about the metal and the carbon fiber and a bunch of other technologies as well that could, so that could be something we do. And I think like more also maybe about the economics of this business generally, I think that also kind of like makes sense.
Yeah.
And what are the economics of the digitization thing? A little bit more concrete, And what? We haven't done materials as well, really, right? We haven't really talked about materials that much either. Those are the things that I think kind of come up, or kind of boil into the surface as we do this kind of year in review thing,
That would be fun, yeah. And we got a few LinkedIn messages too, where people are just wanting to know, not only about the economics of it, but then how do you build a team around additive manufacturing if that's the way that you're going to go? What do you look for, and such? And so I think that would be a real fun thing to dive into as well.
Totally.
Is like the part that we don't talk about. We talk about the robots and all that, but you've got to have people to run the robots and people that know what they want to do, that are passionate about it. And so how do you build one of those teams? I think that's a pretty interesting thing.
I like that. And also like workflow, how do you build a workflow? Like we've had a couple of people talking about that as well, and they kind of seem to have really, really, really crystallized ideas, or it's just kind of random, So how do you build a workflow? I think into one that makes sense for you. I think that's something we've discussed again, but I'd like to hear more people, just because these workflows are so fragmented. And also, how about the central question? I mean, we haven't really talked about that. I mean, we started this, because you're O&P, digitization, 3D printing guy. That's your passion. I'm a 3D printing person. And we wanted to figure out if, like, how impactful is digitization going to be on O&P? And is it going to take over the market? Is it going to become a big thing, or is it just going to become a niche thing? That was kind of like the reason why we started doing this. So after doing this for, well, not a year, right? We started in March, so now it's December 2022. So what's your feeling? I mean, what's your feeling on those things that we wanted to discover? Is it time now for O&P and 3D printing?
I think the time is now. We're getting the squeeze from insurance companies, from the timing of things. How do we increase our volume and efficiency while keeping patient care at the forefront? But we're also seeing these 3D printed devices, through our conversations with our patients, that they're changing lives. And so this idea, additive manufacturing, not only helps with so many other things, but the patient outcomes a lot of times are better. Patients feel better. They're able to do more. And I think at that point, when you start seeing that, hey, this can help my workflow, this can, help me with my time, help me get out of the lab a little bit, and I'm getting better patient outcomes. That's when this really starts getting traction. Because in the end, I truly believe that most all prosthetists and orthotists want to have good patient outcomes, and they will trend to the technology that will give them that. And I think we're there.
Cool, man. I think that's a really inspiring message to kind of end up with. And dude, I'm really looking forward to doing more episodes. I'm really looking forward to kind of continuing this journey with you. I'm really having this is so much fun, and I'm learning a lot. So I really, really want to keep doing this.
Yeah, well, let's keep it going into 2023.
All right, man. And we'll do. Hey, thanks a bunch for listening, everybody. This is the Orthotics and Prosthetics Podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels, and have a great day.